Q&A, and we're very excited. Should I introduce you, or would you like to introduce yourselves? They would like to introduce themselves. Oh wow, okay, all right. So here we have Tembakazi Salayi from
UCT.
UCT. And what are you doing at UCT?
I'm actually doing my PhD in history.
Awesome.
And then I don't know if I should talk about my work now.
No. That's just Mpumi would like to introduce herself. This is the opportunity to introduce yourself, Mpumi.
Hi everyone. My name is Nomphumelelo Babeli, and
From Rhodes?
From Rhodes, yeah. And I'm doing my PhD in politics.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Hi everyone. I am Kananelo Tsuene. I'm doing my second year of master's here at Rhodes University.
Awesome. Yeah, so yes, girls. All right, our first presenter is Mpumi, and Mpumi does the projection, so she'll speak from here. And take it away, Mpumi. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Hi, Mpumi.
So please bear with me. I tried to compress 56,000 words into a solid presentation. So this paper is from the theme I Write What I Like for this year's thing, and it's titled More Than Biko's Widow, Recentering the Life and Contributions of Nontsikelelo, Ntsiki, Biko, Mashalaba. I'm going to read fast because sorry. So in a poem called Let the Walls Crumble, Babeli and Biko asked, where are their voices and where are their contributions and where are their stories? And why must we scrape to the bottom of the earth to find them? This project was motivated by two things. The first being Toni Morrison's speech at Ohio, where she said if there's a book that you want to write that has not yet been written, then you must write it. And the second being my honors presentation, which I was tasked with exploring contributions of women in the struggle in apartheid. I provided images of women who participated in various ways, and when I showed the image of Nontsikelelo, Ntsiki, Biko, Mashalaba, none of the participants knew who she was until I mentioned that she was Steve Biko's wife. Even though at first they didn't know who she was, they started idolizing her after finding out about her, not because of the work that she had done, but rather because who she was married to. Even in the process of writing the story, it was alarming how many people questioned my decision to do this study and whether or not she was worth studying. Such responses evoked in me the desire to revisit women's role in the country and attempt to rewrite their place in history, and particularly the story of Nontsikelelo, Biko, Mashalaba. Kane urges us to rethink and evaluate how biographical writings and writings have focused on supposed quote-for-quote important women by asking us whether to question whether we're interested primarily in the achievements of particular women, and if so, how do we evaluate to analyze them? And do we need to find another approach which allows individual cases to illuminate the experiences of all women in a particular time, place, and social group? Kane goes on to say that at the core of feminism, it seeks to challenge the status quo by focusing on women who have been overlooked, erased, and marginalized in order to account for their complexities and the historical experiences that have shaped them. Borrowing from Mutsume's lens theoretical framework of recentering the alternative memory sites and unearthing alternative memory sites, in search of Nontsikelelo Biko, I made my way to the Steve Biko Center, which I thought would be easy to navigate given the fact that everyone knew who she was and knew who I was searching for and knew about her contributions as they had worked closely with her. In spite of their proximities, most of the collections in the archives were about Steve Biko, with an exception of a few awards and a file containing 2 documents about her. It became very clear that in order to recenter Nontsikelelo Biko and move her from the margin to the center, I needed to navigate the center. The center in this case being Steve Biko and the mountains of collections and articles in journal, books, and videos that have been documented about him. Following that, I made a trip to the South African National Library. I requested information that might pertain to Biko Mashalaba. After searching in the database, the men behind the desk looked up at me with such disappointment and shock and uttered the words, "We do not have anything on her. It seems that she lives in the shadows of her husband. Perhaps you can look into what we have on her husband and maybe you'll find something on her." In searching for Nontsikelelo Biko, I discovered that black women in historical documents have been placed on the margin of society from how they are referred to in newspapers and the kind of sentences that have been written about them. Consequently, putting a full picture of her seemed to be very difficult. In order to do so, I needed to search on the database Biko's widow, and 139 files popped up. I believe that there's more important stories to be told about women's lives, particularly women like Nontsikelelo Biko, whose contributions are yet to be unearthed. There is a need to navigate why it is we know so little, and how titles like Widow of Biko, in this case, give meaning to their identity, and why. Valela noted that widowhood tends to smoother black women, reducing them to nothing more than their relationships with their husbands. Indeed, these bounds are important and mean a great deal for the woman, but there's an important lesson here to be learned about erasure. Sorry. Yes, given that women like Nontsikelelo Biko are rarely remembered and memorialized in South African history, and when they do, they appear as footnotes in their, and appendages to their husband. Nontsikelelo Biko, in the archive, has been captured as Steve Biko's widow, dating back to 1977. To date, very few articles write about her without noting that she is Biko's wife or widow. But most of the archives surrounding him separate him from his marriage. But for her, it's like her identity is formed around the marriage. In a City Press article in 1997, Kunga attempted to position Nontsikelelo Biko outside the confinements of widowhood. It was one of the few articles that aimed to do so. She argued that she makes a contribution in society without claiming the political widowhood. For 44 years, she has been regarded as a widow in public memory, archive, and public imagination. Sipuye argued that similar to this thesis, this work raises much questions about women like Dimpo Hani, Nomieka Goniwe, Nomonde Kalata, Cindy Swamkonto, and many other women, including Veronica Sibokwe, as they epitomize the collective experience of many black women throughout the African continent and the diaspora, given that their role and their contributions remain unacknowledged, and they are written out of popular and historical narrative and biographical memory and national consciousness. They merely exist as wife, widow, and mother. In 2018, Nontsikelelo Biko won an Ubuntu Award at the Golden Shield ceremony, and in an SABC interviewer said to her, the National Heritage Council is talking about developing a book and depicting your life. What would you like to be highlighted in this book? Nontsikelelo Biko ne Mashalaba responded, I would like to be highlighted in this book, not as someone who's under the shadow of Steve. I am his wife, right, but I am still Nontsikelelo, and I'm proud of the family that I come from. The Mashalabas, they made me who I am, and I want to be highlighted. Steve made me when I was my own person, and I had my own upbringing, which might have been completely different from his. As many will note, that the archives with Nontsikelelo Biko began in 1976, when she was verbal about her disappointments towards the TRC. Shortly after that, she published an article where she expressed how the perpetrator's definition of the truth was not the truth, given the fact that they were seeking merely amnesty. It was here, following this, that Nontsikelelo Biko in 1977, after the frustration, traveled to the United States with her eldest son, Kosnati Biko, and this trip was merely to find inspiration to memorialize her husband's legacy. In 1998, she spearheaded the establishment of the Steve Biko Foundation, which continued and championed community-based activism with the stern resilience her community-based projects, which had a distinguished approach to Black consciousness. The foundation addressed critical issues which helped strengthen the concept of democracy, championing scholarship and programs that would enrich relationships between identity, citizenship, and social action. Underpinning the foundation was the 3 C's: community, consciousness, and core skills. Between 2005 and 2012, they decided to build another extension to the foundations of the Biko Center. Those are two different things. And it was here that Nontsikelelo Biko spearheaded this also, which aimed to provide intellectual and economical and development resources to the local and regional communities. Okay, I'm skipping. Today, Nontsikelelo continues to fight on top of building all of these programs. When she won an honorary doctorate at Rhodes University in 2020, for her community engagement work, which was embedded in the Black consciousness, a lady by Sibongile Kaba said, "I would like to salute you, Sister Ntsiki, for being the woman that you have been to all of us, a woman of integrity. You have lived an exemplary life and become a role model to all of us. I know some of us will never do in a lifetime half of what you've done for your people." Nontsikelelo Biko worked with Sibongile Kaba for 7 years along with Ms. Keke and Ms. Mnamo. They established a community-based organization called Sebenza Sonke. This was at the peak of the HIV pandemic in 1997, and her expertise as a health practitioner was invaluable and indispensable. Part of this was teaching women how to, become breadwinners through using their skills in beadwork and in selling that to make an income, and then also building arts and craft and community-based vegetable gardens. Part of this, they did them at the clinic so that when people did their chronic treatments, that they would actually then have food to eat. So this obviously then, yes, it would drive the treatment up because more people could eat and actually do the treatment. Ms. Biko's role Ms. Biko Mashalaba, through the various roles that she has taken and the networks that she had formed in church and community development groups, and her work at the Steve Biko Center, which has been a base of operations since 2012, has had a great impact on the lives of young people and women in her community. Her community work and her role as a mother in the community can be understood as her intellectual contribution, given that her grassroots activism with the community, that has changed various lives. Furthermore, the various women-centered networks that encourage women to harness and utilize their crafting skills and enable them to support their families. Biko Mashalaba and various other women and networks have been a pillar of society through the various projects that are concerned with repairing the insecurities in communities. Yes, the work of Biko Mashalaba, which scratches beneath the surface in order to find better ways of helping the community, engaging in various forms of fixing issues that are wrong with today's democracy, like health care access, poverty, HIV, unemployment, gender-based violence, education, and general insecurities that she sees every day in Ginsburg. She addresses these concerns while holding on to Ubuntu and the Black consciousness philosophy. As Mutsime points that Black women and other women of color's everyday experiences and everyday methods of problem solving in everyday spaces extend to the problem of ending all forms of oppression for all, restoring the balance between people, the environment, nature, consoling human life and the spiritual dimension. In 1977, the article I referred to, Kwaita, said that Biko has remained a very closed book. Biko Mashalaba has remained a very closed book, shying away from the glare of the media. However, Ntsiki, as she's popularly known, is a well-rounded person who makes a contribution in society without claiming to inherit any political status from being a widow. Juggling the role of being a career woman, a community activist, a clan matriarch, homemaker with responsibilities in public life, appears to hold no strain for the last-born of the Mashalabas. In my interview with Ntsiki, I said to her, I note that since 1977 and even recently when Rhodes offered you the honorary doctorate, they casted you as a widow. Does this bother you? Then she said, not at all. I always tell other widows, I'm a patron of the Widow Association, and I always tell them that being a widow does not mean the end of the world for you. Because the problem with widows is that they always want people to sympathize with them and feel sorry for them. No, you are yourself. What happened to you, for instance, me, I'm Nontsikelelo, who happened to be Steve Biko's wife. But I have my own identity as a woman. So the fact that I was Steve Biko's wife does not mean, therefore, that I will always be hiding behind him or underneath his shoulder. I've got to stand up for myself. So widowhood to me, yes, it means your partner is no more, but it doesn't mean that you are dead. The story of Nontsikelelo Biko reminds us in political studies and other disciplines of how women in partnerships with political men, particularly during the liberation struggle, are captured as auxiliaries to men. Very little known about them, their own sacrifice, their labor, ideological position, and participation within that period. The widowhood thus becomes a personal manifestation of the public sense of grief of a lost fallen hero. As Professor Mabizela said in our interview, women who are married to high political figures need to be recognized in their own right, because not doing so will perpetuate a single story. In this case, widowhood being producing a partial, incomplete story. Okay. Shiwambeni pointed out that the idea of widowhood has a large impact on women, and it also alters how they see in society, by society, and possibly how they see themselves forever. As violent states produce many widowed women, they were not born as widows, and their stories do not start and end there. Though they entered into public arena as widows, they have stories, families, roads they've walked, and Nontsikelelo quite certainly has her own path which she's forged. Nontsikelelo saw community activism from her father. I'm going to try and skip because I'm running out of time. In our interview, she reflected on her father's life path, where he was creating spaces for Black people at the time when they were not allowed to go to schools, by building schools in his community and encouraging children to do so. Her father built 2 schools. And then, so she comes from a lineage and tradition that is embedded in community work. Her activism did not start with Biko, in actual fact. Through telling the story of Nontsikelelo Biko, this study evokes, this study evokes story of many women who find themselves in similar positions, like Empaneth, Becky, Morena, who advocates for the uplifting of her community by also teaching women how to do beadwork and handcraft. Also, like Mam Veronica Sibukwe, who also did beadwork in her community and found various ways to teach women how to make an income. As Tonga stated at the death of Veronica Sibukwe, that she was a woman whose contribution and selfishness have been erased and hidden from the public eye. So much so that we only know her as a wife rather than a strong, resilient, fighting activist that she truly was. Sobukwe never turned a blind eye onto her Black people in need, and selflessly endured that she did. She did what she could to meet them where they were. When she died, we saw her images flooding on social media at large, because society we live in recognizes people when they pass away. If only people could take time to truly go and understand the immense role in the struggle, and falling in love with her downplayed her legacy. If only young people could actually lift up the heavy baton, she could have now left us with many stories. Through this study, we begin to understand the importance of how we remember certain women, particularly those of being widows, and that being a widow is not their biggest contribution in society. We therefore need to rethink how we write about them in history and collective memory of the country. The interview with Nontsikelelo Biko showed that she wants to be remembered more, but she wants to be seen and remembered in her own right for her various contributions in society. While she is a living archive who holds many stories about events, places, and things that took place, that even documents do not document. Though through using biographical writing and narrative study as an approach, we begin to fill in the blanks about the life of Nontsikelelo Biko ne Mashalaba. This study filled more blanks about a lot of historical events and women's role in them. The life of Nontsikelelo Biko Mashalaba shows us that women are remembered in society by people and institutions and their community differently to that how the archive remembers them. Which thus brings us to question how much we know is an incomplete story. Perhaps it is beginning to retrace those narratives that we begin to grasp the true history. As Nontsikelelo said in her own words, I am Nontsikelelo, who happened to be Biko's wife. I have my own identity, so the fact that I was Biko's wife does not mean that I will always be hiding behind him, underneath him. I can stand up for myself.
Yes. Yes, girl. Thank you so much, Mpumi. She's crying about time, yet she had a minute and 30 seconds to spare. We won't take questions right now. We'll do them at the end, so please note them as we go along. Are you ready? Do you need to project?
No.
Okay. So, we're getting warm inside. So, yes, let me just do the technology quickly. How do I do this? Yeah. Okay. Our next speaker is Kananelo. Take it away.
So my presentation is a direct quote from the book The Shadow King by Maaza Mengiste. It's a madman on a wild horse blazing through the hills. So before I... Oh, sorry. So the title of my presentation is A Mad Woman on a Wild Horse Blazing Through the Hills. Before I start, I'd like to just give a trigger warning because there are descriptions of sexual abuse that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. So The Shadow King is a book of historical fiction centered around the various social and political trajectories of women who fought and contributed towards war effort in the Second Italo-Ethiopian War of 1935. So Asta, a woman of noble rank, and her servant Heyrut work alongside Kidani, Esther's husband, in rallying up troops and training soldiers for war against their foreign enemies, just as Empress Teitu Beto, an esteemed political figure in Ethiopian history, had done alongside her husband Emperor Melenik during the First Italo-Ethiopian War. So in the second section of the novel, titled Book 2, an unyielding Asta commandeers a group of women to carry supplies up a hill towards her husband's army, who at the time was set to contend with the Italian enemy. So the passage...
Okay. Sorry to interrupt. Just to help with the presentation for the back. Don't worry, I'm not taking time from your time. Do you want to start from the beginning? Do you allow her to start from the beginning? Yep. Yes. Hello? Hello, this one. Which one? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, I'll see this louder. Okay, I'm going to start from the beginning. The Shadow King is a book of historical fiction centered around the various social and political trajectories of women who fought and contributed towards war effort in the Second Italo-Ethiopian War of 1935. It is a book of fiction. Asta, a woman of noble rank, and her servant Heyrut work alongside Kidani, Esther's husband, in rallying up troops and training soldiers for war against their foreign enemies, just as Empress Teitu Betul, an esteemed political figure in Ethiopian history, had done alongside her husband Emperor Melenik during the First Italo-Ethiopian War. In the second section of the novel, titled Book 2, an unyielding Asta commandeers a group of women to carry supplies up a hill towards her husband's army, who at the time was set to contend with the Italian enemy. So the passage is as follows. There are close to 50 women, some of them the relatives and servants of those who have joined Kidani's army. They are young and old, several speaking more than one of the languages in the area surrounding Gondo and Gojam. They have been stripped down to their most essential ability, to carry what cannot move on its own, to shoulder weight and drag it forward. They have done it without complaint. That is on page 99 of the book. What stands out in this passage is its delineation of roles expected for women during war by society's standards. As means towards subversion, a tone of sarcasm and mockery directed against the patriarchy can be recognized, specifically when the roles ascribed to women are concerned.
These women seem to check most of the necessary attributes needed for a soldier to fight during war. Firstly, in the passage, it says that there are close to 50 women present, which, although not a lot, is enough when added to an already established army of Kidani's men. The passage also mentions the women's inclination towards partaking in combat by stating their direct relation to Kidani's men, as most of them are either relatives or servants of men in question, and they would like to be in close proximity with them. So another attribute of these women, which is also regrettably overlooked, is the women's capacity to speak more than one language in the areas surrounding Gondo and Gojam, a skill of great value during war. So with all this said, it is unclear why Kidani has reservations about these women being involved in combat. The passage states rather derisively that regardless of these traits, women have only one most essential ability, which is to carry out what cannot move on its own, to shoulder weight and drag it forward. This specific code can be termed as a double entendre, as although it can simply mean that the women are carrying the weight of supplies needed for war effort, it could also allude to the carrying of the invisible weights of patriarchy, misogyny, grief, sexual abuse, as well as the expectations brought about by Ethiopian culture and tradition. Although women are capable of assuming various roles during war, whether passive or active, they carry the weight of societal standards without complaint. So apart from these descriptions that I talked about, this subversion is also achieved through the inversion and appropriation technique. So as a female writer writing about women, Mengiste writes a lot of what has been left out of Ethiopian and Italian history books. This is attained through what gender theorist Florence Stratton calls inversion and appropriation, a subversion technique used by contemporary female writers. Florence Stratton assesses how inversion and appropriation functions in contemporary African texts, defining inversion as a subversive maneuver that disrupts an already established political order. It is said that this inversion can pertain to gender, so it may append female and male orders, but writers also invert the qualities of good and evil as well as subject and object, so it can be anything really. Inversion involves, according to Jacques Derrida, an overturning which brings low what was high, and is often carried out through the repositioning of two binary oppositions. This, as in Mengiste the Shadow King, is often done with the intention of exposing patriarchal oppression and sexist bias of the male literary tradition, while creating exposure of the female subject in a way the writer believes appropriate to their real-life experiences. So Diadre Lashgiri observes that shifting the vantage point of the subjects allows us to see forms of violence that had been invisible or to see in unfamiliar ways. When the gaze is redefined, what it encompasses changes, deconstructing the master narrative. So appropriation in this case refers to the act of taking control over the representation of character roles and disrupting an established literary or gender order. The inversion is said to operate in conjunction with appropriation and works by merging or replacing positive or negative images appropriated from the dominant discourse with positive or negative ones. This particular technique rings true to the events and characteristics of the Shadow King. Mengiste inverts and appropriates the roles of women and men of the Second Italo-Ethiopian War. As women become soldiers, guards, advisors, perpetrators, and masterminds, words which should not exclusively but are typically associated with men. The novel makes use of Stratton's technique through the debasement of male characters of the Shadow King, particularly characters like Kidani, Minim, and Fusheli, and the elevation of the female subjects such as Asta, Heyrut, the cook, and Fifi. To start, it is important to state that this kind of strategy is often said to be limiting, as it is said to replicate and reinstate the oppressive structure. The oppressive structure of binary oppositions, which can often see things as black and white. So based off of the portrayal of the characters of the Shadow King, I disagree. And I rather suggest that these inversion and appropriation configurations show the way in which both genders can be placed in any kind of role, therefore blurring the line that determines the established gender order. I also argue that the use of real-life historical figures as inspiration for the characterization of some of the women in the book can complicate Stratton's process of inversion and appropriation and render it impractical as far as the novel is concerned. And I'll talk about that in more detail as we go. In the case of my research, Mengiste inverts and appropriates the roles of men and women of the Second Italo-Ethiopian War. So the first case of inversion and appropriation comes as protagonist Herut is captured by the Italians. In that scene, the war between the Ethiopians and Italians has reached its peak, and having lost most of those she had been fighting alongside, alone Herut approaches the Italians and creates a spectacle. There is a disruption of an established gender order as Mengiste designates the role of a soldier in uniform, often worn by men, to Herut. What is more is that in the description it states that, and I quote, "A pool of light heralds her descent," which to me seems to draw biblical reference to the image of the three wise men who, whilst traveling towards Bethlehem, are guided by the light of a star. This reference is gendered as these men served as patriarchs and men of high authority, and the description of Herut's walk in that scene places a woman in the position of the three men, not only highlighting her influence in that specific situation in the battlefield, but the significance of her intentions. In the same way, Etor, who is a man, is said to look up so fast at Herut's approaching figure that his helmet tips backward, and Fofi, who is also a man, drops his gun and presses both his hands on his helmet. This scene displays a moment in the book where men, who by society standards are supposed to wear military uniforms, wear helmets and hold guns, are stunned to a point of not having control over that military equipment. The tipping of Etor's hat, the dropping of Fofi's gun alongside Herut's adornment of the conventionally male military uniform, therefore reverses their roles from the often passive portrayal of women to an assertive one. In the same way, the men in that scene appear to be stunned to a point of resignation when they are often portrayed to harbor the assertive disposition that Herut has now become. Another case of inversion and appropriation in the novel is one which assigns Asta, Kidani's wife, the role of a skilled fighter, alongside her husband Kidani, who in this specific scene is portrayed as less skilled and almost inexperienced about matters pertaining to violence. So while attempting to convince her husband to let her and her troop of female fighters to take part in war, Kidani tells her that she cannot fight in battle as she has never had to do so before, nor was she ever trained for it. He tells her that she knows nothing of what it takes to withstand violence on the human body. And this is the quote. He wants to remind her she has never been in a war. She was not raised to anticipate assaults. She was not taught from an early age about the body's abilities to withstand force. She was instructed on how to shoot, yes, but what does she know about what to do if attacked? So in the specific part of the novel, there is irony, as before the scene is written, Mengiste includes a flashback of a younger Asta being sexually assaulted by this exact man himself, who at the time had been her much older new husband. In that flashback, the cook, who serves as a mentor to Asta, teaches her beforehand the ways in which she has to withstand the violence to be inflicted on her body by Kidani. The cook tells her to close her eyes and open her legs, while repeatedly informing her that there is no way out but through it. And it keeps being repeated throughout the novel. So here there is irony, as the woman's ability to withstand violence is revealed before that of a male character. This irony, as well as Mengiste's structural choices, makes the reader question whether Kidani, the male character, truly knows violence in the same way Asta, a woman, does, reversing the patriarchal order and thus bringing low what was high. Another point is of the phrase, "There is no way out but through it," said to a young Asta by the cook before her sexual assault. The same phrase is used to describe Etor's sentiments when receiving a telegram and faces an arrest. So the man, Etor, also says the same quote in the book, "There is no way but forward." So in the same way, Colonel Fusheli tells his army, "There is no way but through it. There is no escape but forward." So this phrase is used to describe Herut's thoughts while holding a dying Benjamin in her arms at the beginning of the novel as well. So when questioned about the repetition of this particular phrase, the writer Mengiste states that the mantra can be complicated depending on the person who says it. And in the novel it is used by both men and women. This is a form of inversion and appropriation, as although in different situations, both these men and women find themselves at the mercy of fate, to a point where they have no choice but to yield. The phrase is first said by the cook, who is a woman, and then later said by men, Etor and Fasheli. And this inversion displays men's capacity to also be susceptible to resignation, something that is conventionally associated with women. And a lot of these quotes that are said by women first and then by men. So in the same way, the novel inverts the experience of sexual assault. So assault is inflicted on both a man, Fasheli, and a woman, Heerut. And the responses to the assault are astoundingly different. Italian Colonel Fasheli's army is attacked by Kidani's army, and Seifu assaults Fasheli while some of Fasheli's men are killed. The incident is described as follows. As a sharp knife scrapes the tender skin of his neck, Fasheli repeats a boyhood phrase he says he always uses to fill the gap between terror and recognition. He says, "That's all right." Early during this incident, Fasheli is frightened, although not as frightened as he ultimately gets when his belt is loosened, his trousers unbuttoned, his undershorts yanked down. He tries to jerk free, and the knife pokes to his thigh, so quick it is cold as the tip of the blade comes out. The blade drags itself down the middle of his belly, curious, tests the soft meat above his hair. It glides down the tender crease of his pubes. It nuzzles the split curve of his buttocks, then inches towards his anus. Carlos freezes, held hostage and trembling in anticipation. Tears, "Please, please, help me." He is begging and he doesn't care. After the incident, there is a rumor amongst Fasheli's army that he wears 2 belts, and that the ambush made him so paranoid he hardly sleeps at night. So in the same way, a female character, Heerut, is sexually assaulted by Kidani, and Heerut does something Kidani does not expect. She yawns and renders Kidani speechless, to a point where it is as if that open mouth while she was yawning and that bubble of air have begun to undo Kidani. Heerut sees his surprise. She sees the way it traces a path across his eyes. He is so startled that his mouth sags open, and his breathing stops until all he can do is gasp again. She shuts her mouth and opens it again. It is a loaded gun, and she waves in front of him. He cannot escape the indifference stamped across her face, and Heerut refuses to look away, because she sees it now. The fissure is in the sternness and crumbling ground, giving a way to reveal his weakness. It has been there all along, waiting for her discovery. So here Mengiste places both genders in the position of a victim, and while women are often associated with defenselessness and resignation, the roles are reversed, and a male character instead assumes the position. In Fasheli's description, his body is described as soft, like the soft meat above his hair, a word often used to describe women. Although my assessment does not suggest that Fasheli's response to the attack is weak in any way, it inverts and shifts the vantage point, disconstructing the master narrative that often suggests that women are more vulnerable than men. So another case of inversion and appropriation is the one between Heerut and a new recruit, or the man who serves as the Shadow King. His name is Minim. So Minim, whose name is directly translated to nothing, is first introduced as a slightly built man who Kidani says was never built for war, but is a good musician. The gentle musician's descriptions include words such as delicate, cradles, whisper, soft-spoken, slender, bony elegance, fragile. His fate of standing in for Emperor Haile Selassie, who has fled Ethiopia, is discovered by the protagonist, who's a woman, Heerut. And Heerut, in contrast, is described to have a discipline and a military rigidity that could rival any soldier's. Heerut is ordered to get him ready and to be his guard. What is more is that she often has to encourage Minim to adhere to the task at hand. She often tells him, "You're okay, keep your head up. We have to follow orders and be soldiers." Here, Minim serves as Heerut's foil, and his weaknesses are used to highlight the strength of Heerut, the female protagonist. This counts as inversion and appropriation, as one could expect a woman to be described as delicate and fragile, while a man is often attributed the qualities of rigidity and discipline. So in contrast, the similarities between real-life historical figure Empress Teitu and fictional character Asta can be said to complicate Stratton's process of inversion and appropriation. So Esther's character, if looked at closely, bears several similarities to a respected Ethiopian historical and political figure who's a woman, Empress Tetu. So she was an Ethiopian monarch who led Ethiopia to a victory during the First Italo-Ethiopian War. So when Esther sets out to search for guns and recruits as preparation for the impending war against the Italians, she's described as, the title of my presentation, a mad woman on a wild horse blazing through the hills. She is Empress Tetu, resurrected to fight the Pharaoh, which means the Italians. She is an unnamed ghost thrown down by the Almighty, come to curse our foreign enemies. There are similarities here that immediately as you read the book, and if you know Ethiopian history, you can tell that there are a lot of similarities between the two. And from their spirit of vengeance, their detestation for Italian enemies, to their inclination to gather troops and fight alongside their husbands. So in the novel, Esther takes on the role of a fearless leader, and this is an inversion of roles where the gender has been appended. Although this can be the case, the knowledge of the existence of a female military leader like Empress Tetu also suggests that you cannot really invert it if it was already. It suggests that there's no inversion at all, as according to the Ethiopian history, women can be associated with aggression. Therefore, realistically, in this specific case, there are no binaries there to invert if women were already fighting. So in conclusion, Mengiste's use of the inversion and appropriation technique not only showcases women's ability to switch roles and positions during war, but it also blurs the line that forms the established gender order. Rather than suggesting that women are stronger and more superior than men, the inversion and appropriation technique in The Shadow King makes it clear that there is a possibility that men and women can find themselves in the roles and positions that are not conventionally designated to them by society.
Thank you so much for that, Kananelo. Also had a few minutes to spare. They're doing well, eh? Yeah. While you write your questions down, we'll shimmy. Okay. Sorry, ad break. Who wants to sing while we wait? Such a random ad break. It was a random ad break. Then you can at least not be hidden away there. As we were.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tembakazi Salayi, and today I'm going to do a presentation, and the title of my presentation is Rediscovering Forgotten IsiXhosa Women Writers, the Visibility of Letitia, Kakaza, and Victoria Swaartbooi in the History of IsiXhosa Written Literature. So before I start, I would just like to give you a brief background about how I started this study. So I remember I was working at the SABC as a volunteering news researcher, and I was researching, I had to research about the Lavdale Press. And then when I was doing research, I went through a list of all the people who published their novels at the press, and I had to write an article, and I gave it to one of the editors who was Usivu during that time. And Usivu came back to me and she said, "This is very interesting. I noticed that amongst these men, there is one woman who published at the press during the early 20th century. It would be interesting if you found out more about Victoria Swaartbooi." And that's when I started searching her on Google, and I couldn't find anything on her. So I'm a very curious person and I'm always up for a challenge. So the fact that there was nothing written about her, that raised a lot of questions for me. And so I started doing a lot of research on Victoria Swaartbooi. So I found it very interesting that there is a woman who wrote in IsiXhosa in the early 20th century, and there is nothing written or known about her. Yet there's so much that's known about the men who wrote during the same period, such as S.C.K. Mkai, A.C. Jordan, D.D.T. Jabavu, and many more other men as well. So all my life throughout school, I was never taught about the history of IsiXhosa literature, nor was I ever taught in my own language, which is IsiXhosa. So for me, this was very new and very interesting, just to getting to know and to learn about these women who also contributed towards the history, towards IsiXhosa literature during that time. So I started doing a lot of research on Victoria Swaartbooi, and I asked a few scholars about her and her works as well. And while I was doing my research, I came across the work by Dr. Ntsiki and other scholars who had written about her. But what I found a bit confusing, and I was not really fulfilled, is that with their works they did a lot. It focused on analyzing their books. And for me, it felt like it wasn't enough, because I felt like I needed to know more about who they were and where they come from as well. And that's when I started collecting information, and that's when I started to write their biographies. So the archives from the Corey Library, as well as the Department of, as well as the archival department at Forte, which is called NAHEX, were very helpful in tracing both Kakaza and Swaartbooi. Now let me start telling you about these two remarkable women, and hopefully you will be inspired from this, and the narrative will change when we talk about the women, when we talk about the history of IsiXhosa literature, that we don't only speak about Mkai and A.C. Jordan, that we talk about Letitia Kakaza, Victoria Swaartbooi, Nontsikelelo, Zora Futshane, and many more other women who contributed towards IsiXhosa literature in the early 20th century. Now, Letitia Kakaza Kwacha was one of the first South African women to write a novel in an indigenous language. In the study, I refer to her as Letitia Kakaza because that's the name that she used when she published her book. In addition to writing a novel, she was also a musician, and she composed songs for the Africa Church hymn book. Kakaza's work inspired a generation of black women writers to follow in her footsteps, because after her, that's when writers such as Victoria Swaartbooi and Zora Futshane came into the picture. She was born on the 6th of May, 1883, and her father was Reverend Ghana Kakaza of the Wesleyan Church, who was from Mkwebe, near Hilltown, and her mother, Ghana Kakaza, who was from Gabula. A church community hall in Port Elizabeth is named after her father, that is known as the Ghana Kakaza Hall of the Wellington Methodist Church in New Bright, Port Elizabeth. She had 4 sisters and 2 brothers, and she was the second born at the time of her death, and she was the only one left of her siblings. Their grandfather was a Fingu chief. She had an older brother named Theodore Kakaza, who was a well-known medical doctor in the US. He was one of the 10 black South Africans who went to study at the Wilberforce University in Ohio in 1896 with Charlotte Maxeke as well as Marshall Maxeke. He graduated in the US, and on the 31st of May 1947, Letitia Kakaza lost her brother when she was 64 years old, and Theodore was buried in the US. So at the time when Letitia Kakaza was actually a product of missionary education, and it is very evident in her writing as well. So she studied here in Grahamstown as well as in Port Elizabeth. She also did her teacher's training course in Hilltown as well. And at the time when her brother was in his 6th year in America, he asked that one of his siblings should join him and study abroad, and that's when her father chose her to go join him, and she did her BA in America as well. So unfortunately, by the time when she came back, her mother Grace Kakaza was critically ill at the time. And that's when it was during this time that she started to write her 2 books. She first wrote her book, which was published in 1913, which is called Intyatyambo Yomzi, as well as Utandiwe Wagwadaleka, which was published in 1914. And both her books were published her first book actually was published at the Methodist Book Room in Cape Town, and the second book was published in Butterworth. She was married to Reverend V.R. Kwacha, and the date of her death is not known. But she was forced to after her husband's death, she was forced to return to a home in Debe, where they bought a plot that was formerly owned by her father, Gana Kakaza. And it was until her last moment. She wanted to do everything on her own, although her body did not allow anymore. She worked very hard. Her family actually is known for planting a lot of churches around the Eastern Cape during the missionary times. And she was a great example to her children and her grandchildren. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is Letitia Kakaza. Now let me tell you about Victoria Nomphumelelo Swaartbooi. So unlike Kakaza, she was not married, and she did not have the same opportunities as Kakaza, who was able to study abroad. And very little information is known about her, but there is information about her that was written in the book Women Writing Africa, the Southern Region. But yet there is a huge gap in terms of the information that is available about her life, because we don't know about the cause of her death, because she died in her youth. She died when she was 30 years old, and which was 3 years after she published her book. So she was born in the Eastern Cape, in the Namakwa district in 1907. And her father's name was Hans Swaartbooi, who died on the 16th of December 1944, and her brother was Douglas Swaartbooi. So she studied at the Mgwali Training School in Port Beaufort in 1924. And she wrote a book called Umandisa, which was published by the Lovedale Press. So there was a lot of communication even after her death that her brother as well as her father made with the Lovedale Press, making sure that even after her death that her book is published and well known. She died in 1937, which was years later after her book was published. So both Victoria Swaartbooi and Letitia Kakaza wrote novels at a time when women's writing in IsiXhosa was not widely accepted. The archives have exclusively documented how the male figures in their lives influenced both of their literary careers, with no mention of the role performed by women. There is more available information on Kakaza than on Swaartbooi because Kakaza's father was a prominent figure during that time and her brother was a well-known doctor in the US. This raises a lot of questions about public archives and what certain institutions regard as important when it comes to archival information on women. Now, before I end off, I would like to read this message from Victoria Swaartboi's book, which she wrote to inspire women. So this is her book, Umandisa. It's available at the Laftel Press, Apha Alice. So she says, Hambani ngoko, niyakuzenza abafundi zonke inhlanga. Nibafundisa ukuba bazigcine zonke izinto endinimisele umthetho ngazo. Niyabona, nandinani yonke imihla, kude kube sekuphelisweni kwehlabathi eli. Ukuze ibuye iAfrika entsundu, iyakuphuma imidakakazi yezwe layo, kunye nemidaka. Siqale ke sithi, mayibuye iAfrika. Qhuba njalo nzwakazi enkulu lo manyathelo akho esinqwenela ukuhamba ngawo nathi. Zintombi ze-Afrika, qhubani eyenu indima ekuyibuyiseni nasekuyimiseni iAfrika, eli lizwe lokuzalwa kwenu. Xa siyenzile ke indima yethu ngabanye, sihlale sisonke izandla. Kofaneleka xa sithi, Nkosi sikelela iAfrika, maluphakame uphondo lwayo. So that is a message that Victoria Swaartbooi wrote in the last page of her book, and she dedicated it to women. So I would like to screen a film that I created.
Yes, girl.
If there is still time, and the name of the film is called Ndokulandela.
Yes. How long is it?
We'll just start it. I think it's about 5 minutes.
Okay, we do have time. We have more than enough time. Oh, that's nice. Yes, girl.
This panel is good.
Just yours or almost there.
Hambani ngoko niye kuzenza abafundi zonke intlanga, nibafundisa ukuba bazigcine zonke izinto endinimisela umthetho ngazo. Niyabona, mna ndinani yonke imihla kude kube sekuphelisweni kwehlabathi eli. Ukuze ibuye iAfrika entsundu, iya kuphuma imidakakazi yezwe layo, kunye nemidaka. Siqale ke sithi, mayibuye iAfrika. Qhuba njalo zwakazi enkulu lo manyathelo akho esesinqwenela ukuhamba ngawo nathi. Zintombi ze-Afrika, qhubani eyenu indima nasekuyibuyiseni nasekuyinyuseni iAfrika eli lizwe lokuzalwa kwenu. Xa siyenzileyo ke indima yethu ngabanye, singahlali sisonke izandla. Kofaneleka xa sithi, Nkosi sikelele iAfrika, maluphakame uphondo lwayo. Umzi wakwaTsweni. Ndithe xa ndihleli phantsi komthi, ndikhangela ngapha nangapha. Ndithe xa ndihleli phantsi komthi, ndikhangela ngapha nangapha, ndibuka ubuhle belizwe. Ngaloo mhla sihle. curriculum. I have this curriculum today that is start, but also a whole other curriculum in that Nayas. In March, this course, kwisikolo zabelungu, ndizodibana nazo kumabanga aphezulu, kumabanga aphansi, singadibani nesiXhosa.
Yeah, can we give them another round of applause? I think a very big well done to the three of you, and you just got, well, my mind definitely just racing, thinking, and learning a lot about things I also feel robbed of not knowing. But I won't take too much time. We have about 10 minutes to engage in questions and discussion. Let's keep it brief, and then maybe extend it while we're having lunch, because you can't think on a hungry stomach. But we can definitely take a few questions. I would like to open the floor. I've got a hand there and there, and then there. Thank you very much. Let me start here.
So this goes to Nomphumelelo.
Yeah, unprovoked for me question.
So I'm just thinking of Biko as a living archive, and that the fact that there wasn't work substantially written on her. What was her point of refusal in that game?
Refusal.
What was she opening up, or rather, what was at the moment for a part of the engagement?
Let's take the next question, and then we'll take. So think about what you want to say. Hand there, yes.
Thank you. Hi.
Hello.
Mine actually is not a question. I just want to congratulate the three speakers.
Yes.
The confidence, and also it shows they went above and beyond.
Absolutely.
To get the information, the way that they put it, across, and I can say these are our future academics.
Yes!
I'm also kind of scared to make my presentation. I'm thinking of withdrawing after.
Too much pressure.
Because they've actually set the bar very high. But thank you for that. And then also touching on the presentation that you gave us, about the invisibility of females, in the archive, yesterday, the archive, and also in the literature. It takes me back again, maybe especially to Nomphumelelo, who was our winner last year in our inaugural lecture. When I saw you presenting, I was like, wow, she's getting there every time. So it takes me back. I remember when I was doing research about Tandala, and sorry, what's your name again? I'm trying to look. Tembakazi. When you talked about NIEX at Fort Air, I've actually been there myself, immersing myself, looking for information for Dr. Tandala, only to find that it was actually immersed with the work of a late husband, A.C. Jordan. You see, that actually shows you sometimes the position that as women we are given. And ordinarily, I actually walked out and said, then which means there's nothing about her. Then they said, no, check the boxes there about your husband, maybe you'll find something. And then now when I went there, I was shocked with the amount of information that was there about Dr. Tandala, Phyllis Tandala. And also you look at the likes of Prudence Babeli, the first woman ever to come out about the status being HIV positive. But how many people have written about Prudence? About her life, the role that she played in South Africa. When you want to get to hear about her, it's like you just have to go to YouTube and listen when she was giving, the speeches as an activist and all those things. So thank you so much for provoking us and, for we learned today, we unlearned, and we relearned when you gave us those presentations. Thank you so much, colleagues.
Thank you for that. Professor?
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm being naughty.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentations. I have a question for Bumi and Tembakazi. Bumi, I remember correctly that Biko was from Tohan. Is that correct?
Correct.
Tata, I've seen something like that. I just want to make sure. But where I'm going is, so I saw that somewhere, and I was surprised. I lived in that, I grew up in that space, and I sort of wondered what, if she said anything to you. You mentioned, her father briefly, but how did her foundation shape who she is, and what was that foundation? What are some of the features of that foundation? If she grew up in Umtata, which is a fairly peri-urban area in Tohana, quite close to town. So I'm curious about that. And I don't quite like this thing of saying a woman in her own right, I hate it. Right there with the use of the term, the sketch, and take us into your confidence. Those things are meaningless at this point to me, because it's never the same, Anyway, that's the question for you, Bumi. And then, Tembakazi, thank you for your work. I just wondered about the engagement. How it is? Was there no engagement of these novels by these women, by their peers, by the newspapers? What was said when they did come out? How were they read or understood? Thanks.
You want her to start? Okay. Tembakazi?
So for me, regarding engagement, no, there was no engagement. When I went through the archives, I could not find any connection in terms of them and the other writers. However, with Swaartbooi, she does engage with, because she references, I think, Ntsiki, one of the hymns. And then, that was all. And another thing in terms of engagement, there are letters that are available at Pekori Library. The letters that I spoke about that were written by her family as well as her, letters to the Lafdale Press. And in one of the letters, I think it was O Shepherd who was working during that time, he does state that incwadi kaSwaartbooi iphume ngexesha elifanayo neKayi. Was it? Yeah. So they both came out at the same time. They were both given same copies, but la ncwadi I think it was Ityala Lamawele. Ityala Lamawele, I think IsiXhosa. Le kaMqhayi. But there is a book by Mqhayi that came out the same time as Leka Swaartbooi. And it's very interesting, Bana Leka Mqhayi got a lot of recognition. At the same time, same copies and everything. So in terms of connection, that was the only connection that I saw through archives with the other writers.
By engagement, you mean by the press at that time?
Yes, the press at that time, the Lafdale Press. But there was no reviews. There's no reviews on the books. But the only engagement is like scholars later during the year by Dr. Nontsikelelo. But yeah.
Sure. So basically,
yeah, that was like
this is my time. Okay, so I'm gonna start with Skombuzo's question. You were saying living archive and refusing to open up about certain stuff. So it took me about a year and a half to secure an interview with Biko. And partially because the first time I was trying to do it, obviously I went through the foundation, which obviously then had their own red tapes, and then I went through certain individuals who were male figures. And it became vividly clear along the way somewhere that her silence served as protection, mainly because I think I was sitting with someone who was telling me that the last interview that she did was in 2002 or 2003, and it was with that guy, Generations guy. Yes. And he had asked questions that she was very uncomfortable with, and she had to withdraw from the interview mid shooting, and he never really gave her a copy, so she cut out doing interviews from that point on, and whatever. So everything has always been telephonic. So the only way I secured and managed to get an interview with her was going through another woman, a former ambassador, because they'd been close friends. So it was mainly women who assured her that, no man, let her tell our story, sort of a thing. And when I got there, it was because I came from people who had known me and were comfortable with me to be like, she's just a kid. So when I got there was no red tapes of sorts. I remember the first time I called her, I spoke to her, I thought it was just going to be like a chat, we're just going to talk, it's nothing going to be hectic, no interview. I wasn't even ready. I wasn't ready for the interview at all, because I thought, okay, I'm just going to talk, she's just going to get to know me, figure out what my thesis is about, and then she'll give me a date. And within 5 minutes of just speaking, she said, okay, I have free time now, let's do the interview, what are your questions? I didn't even have questions at that point, so everything was from the top of my head. We went through it. So after I'd started writing, I told her that I wanted to follow up, and I visited her home and stuff. And when I got there, it had been because I asked about her specifically, that she was able to open up about other things that I never asked about. And for me, I didn't feel the need to document and record those, because it was like, it's just chats. I don't know. They didn't feel the need to be documented. I mean, we took a walk around this other place, and she was telling me how she used to walk there in mini skirts and these things, and I was just like, oh, so you were young, and she was just telling me stories about her family, her life. So there were no go zones per se, and I think the one thing that I did was not come in there trying to find out about her husband, which is the avenue that most people really opt for. So for me, it was more finding out about her. But even then, for that conversation to take place, it took, because with people older than myself, like for example, people of her generation, you find that the pieces of information come more in the conversation and not the interviews. So you always have to keep being attentive, because they provide you so much more information. I don't know. So there was not really any go zones, I would say. There was nothing that I said, and then she was like, no, there was not necessarily any of that. So to answer Dr. Magaza's question, Professor, sorry. I know she was born in, is it Lebote, I think, at some point. But they moved around a lot, because I remember in one of our interviews, she mentioned that her father used to work at the mine, and the mine was somewhere else, and that's where he started the first school. And it was only after the success of that they moved to Lebote, and then after moving to Lebote they moved to Tsolo. So the family moved around a lot, and she did mention the question that you're asking me. I actually did ask her. I don't know if I quite captured it there. I did ask her, you mentioned so much about your father in everything that you do. So what is it about that foundation that made you who you are? And she said that in her family, they didn't necessarily have, it was her mother, and her siblings, and she was the youngest of them all. And the way they moved around so much, and her father would even had a horse, like one of those carriage situations, and he would just go picking kids who were doing vegetable gardens and busy outside and not at school during school times. He would just take them from their families and take them to school. And that's how he maintained a living generation of educated blacks. And even the schools that he built, he was a firm believer in education. And that her mom, yes, she was also trained professionally as a teacher, but she was a stay-at-home wife. And she, in some capacity, in watching her family always bring in people from all over the community every single time. It was not just their family home, it belonged to everyone. That for her taught her the importance of sharing and always opening your spaces up to help others. And she took that on, as she went through her life journey. Even as a nurse, how she got into nursing. It was because she was following her friends, actually. It was not because she wanted to be a nurse, because all her friends were going out being nurses. So she's always been a people person. I think she still is. Even the way she thinks about society around her and even how the center is navigated. So I think that, and she's a firm believer in education. She will tell you that her clan, her lineage is a very educated lineage. She takes pride in it. She takes pride in education and all of that. And yeah, that's it. Sorry.
Yeah, before she answers the next question.
Sorry.
We have only room for one more question because the people next door are also making noise. We've got a hand there.
Thanks. My question is for Kano. And a bit for Tembakazi, but Tembakazi, you can think about it, you don't have to answer it. I wanted to check in terms of location, where the writer is at the particular moment of writing the story. If you find that Mengiste is in America, right? So how does that, in your thinking, affects the way you write, the freedom or the inhibitions thereof? And also, there's this thing that we writers talk about, that the gaze. What do you tell? What do you keep for yourself so that you don't make a spectator of the story that you're talking about, but it also keeps the authenticity and the sensitivity that it requires. And it's the same thing, Tembakazi, for the time that we were writing in. You find that or Dazela, but Dazela comes in very late. But maybe you'll think of Nontsikelelo. You think of no finish and you think like, are you able, when you're writing that work, to tell that this is the woman that was writing? Or because with men you find that they write a lot about things that are outside of themselves. But if you compare the poetry of Jolone versus Nontsikelelo, you find Nontsikelelo writes close to the wound, lack of a better word, closer to the things that matters to her and then matters to everybody, the home front, and the man writes from outside of the home front. There's a question somewhere, they will comment.
Yeah, this one you said, can think about it.
Yeah.
This one perhaps want to, Kananelo, would you give a response?
The location, if the location matters when you write.
Yes, I didn't mention it, but she is a diasporic writer, so she is in America. She was born in Ethiopia, and then she moved to America a bit later on in her life. So what I also didn't mention, that isn't in this section of my work, is that I have two other authors who are also diasporic. And I did that for a reason. I think there's a level of passion and a kind of honesty with diasporic writers. They always like to write about their homeland, and they go the extra mile, because she actually managed to go back to Ethiopia and Italy as well to do that extra research. So I am looking into it, but I feel like there is a lot of passion when it comes to diasporic writers, where they feel like they have to go the extra mile. And I'm not saying that writers who are originally from there don't do that, but I found it really interesting that the three of them aren't really there right now at the moment, but they have that passion to keep searching and writing about their homeland. And then for your second question, you asked me about, you said what keeps it from being a spectacle, right? Because it's fiction. Another thing I wanted to say is that I have a book that I'm using. My third primary text is a memoir. So you'll find that in that specific memoir, it's not her story. So she's writing the story of her grandmother. So it's purely based on stories she's heard from her grandmother, and she's writing her story, her memoir. And what's really interesting about that story is that she adds really small details that you wouldn't think that she would know. So she has to make up a lot of that information herself. Because she knew her personally, so she is able to do that. But also in her book, in this specific book I was talking about right now, you find that they fictionalize actual human beings who lived, so historical figures. You have Haile Selassie, who I guess a lot of us know. They fictionalize him in this book, in a sense that there's a lot of dialogue. And it'll mention that his daughter died at some point after getting married due to childbirth, and they talk about his thoughts and how that kind of haunted him for a while. And when I first read it, it kind of freaked me out a little, because I thought, how could somebody have that freedom to write about somebody who is actually alive and be able to fictionalize it in that way? But I don't know, I think as long as we know that it is fiction, it opens up possibilities of what could be, and I think that's the point of reading these stories. If that.
Thank you so much, everyone. Please keep the conversations going. I think lunch is at Rosti. Everybody knows? Or just follow the crowd.